Yeah, no, don't do that.
I know. I'm holding back now. Can't
You're
you tell?
holding back.
Jesus Christ. This is me holding back. Are you
Oh,
kidding?
God.
I only came here to serve God. That's all. That's all God wants from me, I'm sure of it.
But think of how you're blessed. God actually makes himself known to you. I don't know what God wants from me. All my life, I've wanted to hear God's voice. I've dedicated my life to him. Sometimes I think I feel him, but I'm never really sure. But you always know. God took you by the hand and brought you here.
You think it's a blessing to know what God wants? I'll tell you what he wants. He wants to push me over. Can't he see what's inside of me? All my sins.
We all sin.
Not my sins. I'm a liar. A hypocrite. I'm afraid of everything. I don't ever tell the truth. I don't have the courage. When I see a woman, I blush and look away. I want her, but I don't take her for God, and that makes me proud. And then my pride ruins Magdalene. I don't steal, I don't fight, I don't kill, not because I don't want to, but because I'm afraid. I want to rebel against you, against everything, against God, but I'm afraid. You want to know who my mother and father are? You want to know who my God is? Fear.
So I just kind of want to talk about first about how this film impacted each one of us. So we'll go through this again. I'm Kenneth. You amongst us has the most time with this film.
Yeah, I watched this film a few years ago with my mother.
Oh, it was a few years ago.
Before this last time.
Yeah.
But I'd seen it again, and this is one of my favorite films, so I watch this periodically with different results. Sometimes, like I've fallen asleep on this film. I don't know if anybody else here has, but because sometimes it just gets to this part where I'm not sure if my consciousness doesn't want to take this part in. I always used to fall asleep, really, once he got off the cross, and the angel has the whole other life thing. I'm like, God, how did it relate to the movie? And it actually took me a few watchings of the movie to really get how profound his see that. I thought the huge part of that scene of getting him off the cross was the famous line, Father, talking to God, why hast thou forsaken me?
Right.
Because I think we all feel that at some point in our life. And that's that, some people call it a coming to Jesus moment, but that's that coming to Jesus means actually God.
Right.
Coming to grips with our deepest, and this is where the soul, that's what Jesus' name, this is my own philosophy thing, and getting it right in there, Jesus, she's us, he's us. That we only need to look within our own selves and our own heart and our own capacity to have empathy for others to find us.
Totally.
Jeez, she's, he's, us is the key part of that word.
Totally.
If we can have that, that can be so beneficial for people just to take a burden off their shoulders, is that I'm not forsaken right here all the time. Pain's immediately taken away. He goes into this other life, blah, blah, blah. He gets to choose the other choice, as if every choice we make as a human being changes our whole, we have no idea.
Right.
But it's this vast change. Die for humanity, the sins, blah, whatever.
Right, totally.
Or live like a man and fuck women and have babies and die. Withered. Old.
Like a bear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Kenneth. Yeah, totally, like spot on. I totally 100% agree, and I've heard you say that multiple times.
Hence the podcast.
Yeah, the she's us, he's us. In fact, yeah, I kind of want to touch upon this podcast specifically because Kenneth and I have been talking about this film since we first met, and I think it was probably one of the first films we talked about together where we were just both like, yeah, like we get each other as far as like people and also film watchers. And so we finally got down to actually watching it together, and then it took a year. It took a year, and then I started this podcast up, and things just kind of aligned. And Kenneth and I kind of took a month-long break away from each other, and I just took a break from people in general. And so now that we came back, I was like, well, we should record this podcast. So here we are. Ben, when did you first see this movie, and what kind of impact did it have on your life? Also, how did it make you feel, and having watched it again recently, has your perception changed at all?
Well, first off, man, I love that Jesus, he's a Jesus. I love that. And I also really liked how you said that you've fallen asleep at that moment when he's up on the cross, and maybe it was your conscience, just shutting off. It's time to go to sleep. 'Cause when we watched it the other night, that's when I fell asleep.
You fell asleep on that part.
I saw the last thing I saw was his guardian angel saying, "You can come off the cross now," and then I fell asleep and started waking up when he's an old man, and then
I think it's her voice, her British voice. It just blows it.
Yeah, and they're actually that was Satan, but I'm still in and out of sleep, so I'm what is going on right now?
Right.
And so I rewatched it and got to see the ending at my house the other night or yesterday. But I first saw this movie when I was about somewhere around 15 years ago, when I really started getting into more serious about watching film, art films and stuff like that, and becoming a bigger Scorsese fan, seeing his older works and stuff like that. And it was interesting too, because it was right around the time when I started getting a lot more into spirituality and actually trying to learn about meditation and stuff like that. So I was trying to learn about all sorts of different religions and ways of getting in touch with the universe and God, as some people call it. And so this was the first time I had seen it since then. And I'm not very I don't know the Bible. I've only read parts of it, so I don't know what's in the Bible and what isn't. But so the last temptation part, is that anywhere in the Bible, or is that no? I
mean, the devil does tempt Jesus,
right?
I think in the desert, and there was a couple of other times, but yeah, it's not. Jesus is, first of all, Jesus in the Bible is not a human being. Jesus is he's the Son of God. He's not the person that's portrayed necessarily in this film. He's something that's more, and we'll get into that a little bit more about apotheosis and about the divinity of humans and stuff like that. But yeah, so he's not, that's not really in the Bible. Yeah.
Okay. So I love this story. I would be interested in reading the book sometime. I like how it shows him as a man, and it's something that anybody could relate to.
Totally.
Yeah. And what we were talking about the other night of the practicality of these hardcore religions versus a real life.
Right.
And so I like to take things metaphorically and and kind of an ideal to live up to, rather than I have to be like Jesus or something like that, or who wants to live like that?
Well, some people do.
Some people
say they do.
Some people say they do.
Yeah. Whether they actually do is another whole other thing.
But I also this time I can't, it was so long ago the first time I saw it, so I don't really remember everything about it, but I definitely remember liking it and it being a very interesting take on the whole Jesus story. But this time it was cool seeing it. It didn't feel necessarily pro or anti-religion. It just seems this
relatively
story.
objective.
Yeah. And just a cool idea of a possible outcome of if this story did ever happen. Maybe it was something like this, or
Yeah, it's an interpretation, totally.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's. I saw the movie when I was a kid because I was really into like controversial films for a while, and like I think I might have watched this and Cannibal Holocaust on the same night, and both of those movies are just ridiculously long. But I watched both of them, and I think I watched Cannibal Holocaust first, and then I watched this movie. So this movie was like nothing by comparison. So I was just like, this is controversial. But I remember watching it, and I remember just being not real. I remember it just kind of like flowing through me, and just like not really. I was really young then, and I didn't really have a full grasp on religion, or even like I was raised partially Baptist, so I am familiar with the Bible. I've read it a few times. I did study theology for a little while. In fact, that's what I thought I wanted to do with my life, was I wanted to study religion and God. And once I realized that really what I wanted to study was people, that's when I focused more on things dealing with sociology and cultural psychology and stuff like that. But this film, yeah, definitely had an impact on me. I didn't really know why. I just remember it was really weird. And I do remember the Last Temptation part, because I was like, what's that all about? And then I remember my mom telling me that the devil shows up and stuff, and so I was thinking it was like, some kind of cool, like, horror film or something really spooky or whatever, and it's like this little girl, and which, can be pretty spooky, little British girl, depending on who you're talking to. And so...
So are you saying that the last temptation of Christ is the little girl asking him?
Yeah, that's his last temptation, and so
live like a man.
Yeah, he gets tempted through the entire movie, and so that's the whole idea, is that Jesus is being questioned in his face. But so when the second time I watched this film was in film school, was when I was I wasn't in film school, I was taking film classes, and so I watched it then, and we studied it academically, and I was already studying Scorsese's work and stuff like that, so I understood it then academically. And then the third time I watched it was all the way through, was with you guys. I had seen pieces and stuff all the way through the years, particularly the major important scenes, like the last part with I feel like the last part with Judas is the most important scene in the entire movie. What Judas tells him and what he talks to him about really kind of ties up the theme of the movie about faith and
broke
about
my heart.
The soul.
Sometimes I curse the day I ever met you. We held the world in our hands. Remember what you told me? You took me in your arms. Dear. And you begged me, betray me. Betray me. I have to be crucified. I have to be resurrected so I can save the world. I'm the lamb, you said. Death is the door. Judas, my brother, don't be afraid. Help me go through the door. And I loved you so much. I went and betrayed you. And you... What are you doing here? What business do you have here with women, with children? What's good for a man isn't good for God. Why weren't you crucified?
Look at his wounds, Judas. They're bleeding. You're hurting him. That's enough.
He was going to be the new covenant. Now there's no more Israel.
No, you don't understand. The guardian angel. God sent the guardian angel to save me.
Angel? What angel? Look at her. Satan.
I told you we would meet again.
If you die this way, you die like a man. You turn against God, your Father. There's no sacrifice. There's no salvation.
part 2, which we talked about in length last night. In fact, we stopped the movie for like a good hour to talk about, and it's in reference to. There's a scene where Mary, after Jesus has like started to come into his own as far as a Messiah and whatnot, she comes to him and she wants to talk to him as a mother to a child. And Jesus basically rebukes her and tells her, he asks her who she really is. And and Scorsese refrains on that moment, and he refrains on her. And another woman comes up and she says, Mary basically says like, that's my son. He basically broke my heart. And the woman says, well, no, you got to see it as something else. You got to see it as tiny blue angels, And I think back to that practicality we talked about earlier. I think that there is, the Jesus in the Bible, I don't think is a realistic guide to live by, and I don't think that the idea that I don't believe that the idea that religion has to be completely impractical, because the problem with philosophy and the problem with certain types of thinking is that it's impractical because things need to be procured, food needs to be put on the table, jobs need to be had, and with this instance, his mom is a human being, and she raised him, and she had to deal with the stigma of being a single mother, and she had to, Joseph was there, but she was, Jesus was born out of wedlock, and whether people believe that he was the Messiah or not, that's, blasphemous at the time, and so they are both marked.
She was married?
But Jesus wasn't his son, and it was very clear that he wasn't his son. Joseph married after Jesus was born, and so that's completely against the Jewish tradition, and so they're both marked in society as being blasphemous. In fact, Mary, the mom, is almost on the same level as Mary Magdalene, the sex worker, in the Bible, and so she's had to live with all that conviction, and so we're left with that conviction in that scene. We're left to ponder the more complexity of it. It's not just the flowery things that Jesus said to his mom. It's actually the flowery things that Jesus said to his mom that is true, but also the real repercussions of that, the consequences of those words. These words hurt his mother because his mom is of the flesh as he is, and she still suffers. And I kind of feel like it's like one of those moments where like one of your friends goes on a diet, you know what I mean? And they start talking about all these wonderful, like the pink cloud, they start talking about all these wonderful things about their diet, and they start talking to you about their diet and stuff, and then you're just like, how practical is that in somebody's life? You know what I mean? Like Gwyneth Paltrow, how practical is it for people to be getting fucking gold-plated colonics? You know what I mean? Like that's nice to say. It's nice for Joel Osteen to say, let's clothe and protect people, but then when push comes to shove, he doesn't do it. And I've used him before. He's a prime example of just how impractical the philosophy of anything is that words don't really clothe people, words don't feed people, and words certainly don't bring people into their churches when they're about to drown and die. So that to me is why I think that Scorsese, in a lot of his films, he was raised Catholic, and so in a lot of his films he talks about the complexity of religion. He has these characters who have these moral difficulties, in Goodfellas, or in, they're raised Catholic, but they don't act like Catholics, or even in The Godfather. You have the dichotomy in The Godfather where you have, this criminal activity happening underneath this guise of this, this Roman Catholic, guys, and that to me, and I think, is a good example of what Scorsese is trying to say here, which is that religion is complex. Everything that we do is complex, and so if you're going to see it, you can't just see it for the pretty words. You also have to see the reality of it too. So I, like I said, we talked about that for a little while last night, and I understand. I totally understand. I think we were both pretty much on the same page. I just think that. I think that his words for me as an adult now come off as apathetic to me, and that's not the loving, caring Jesus that I know, because that's not something. I mean, if he wanted to like elevate or whatever his mom, I don't know. It just I don't know. There's a reason why Scorsese put that part in the film. And there's a reason why he refrained on it. So, but I think that kind of touches upon the.
When you say refrained on it, what does that mean?
He kept it in. He left it in. Like, he left that part in the scene. The next scene, he showed how those words impacted his mother.
You mean with the woman asking
Yeah,
about the movie?
yeah. This is not a documentary. They're not just filming stuff that actually happened. There was a choice made to keep that in the film, and there's a reason why Scorsese kept that in the film. He kept it in there to show you that there's complexity to all of this.
So when Jesus is quoted in the Bible, this isn't in the Bible.
No, this is
Right.
not in
This
the
is
Bible.
just this is the what if, and it could have happened.
Yeah, this is all speculative
He could have
fiction.
said that.
He could have.
Okay,
Yeah.
so but that makes sense. But from a someone who's been looking for truth for quite. I have a T-shirt that says I am. And the truth changes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always the same. Truth is a malleable thing. It
Right.
depends on the moment. It depends on what's going on now, and that's always only at that moment. Then it's something else.
Yeah.
So in the moment that he was telling her, asking her who is she, and I know you. So I get that you get this.
Mm-hmm.
But Todd, gosh, I literally, that's the part that I did with my mom, who cried. What are you doing allowing your mother to cry in front of you? You know what a gift it is to have your mother cry, that you actually created those tears? Well, what's in tears? We have a disillusion that somehow if a woman, especially if it's your mother, cries because you said something, somehow you're not being the son you should be. I think there's a social pressure to not make your mother cry. Okay? These tears, though, are, when analyzed, Deepak Chopra, blah, 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 other people say this, have toxins in them. When a woman cries, when a mother cries, it's good. When we cry as men or don't, we're missing out, or it's good that we cry. Any culture that says, real men don't cry, I question that culture.
I will agree with you there that I think that there's a lot of merit in everybody expressing their feelings and feeling their feelings, negative or positive, or I don't even think you should attribute words like that to your feelings, but feelings are a natural part of being a human being. And if we're going to be talking about feelings and it being a human being, we also have to talk about the fact that his mom was a human being. You can't just accept Jesus' humanity and not accept his mom's humanity. But I agree with you that I think that what he was trying to do was he was trying to help his mom. And we have to look at intention. But at the end of the day, we also have to realize that, like I said, as an adult, I don't want to.
Wait a minute. So the reason, I'm sorry, it just hit me right now. The reason why he made that point, why he left this piece of the thing in the film, these scenes, is because the whole point, if I'm right, if the whole point of what Jesus was really sent here for was to allow us to discover our own souls within ourselves, he was asking his mother to do that in that moment. He was asking her to look at her deepest soul. Then she, because he, wait a minute, wait, why? Because he was trying to foreshadow the suffering he knew he was going to cause her, because she didn't know he was going to the cross yet.
Right.
As far as I know.
Right. No, that I understand.
And he knew that's where he was headed.
I can appreciate that.
And that's going to hurt a mother
can.
more than anything. Their child dying before them.
But I have to empathize with Mary here and see that Jesus was this whiny little bitch his entire life, and that he, bitched about this whole purpose of himself, and then when he finally started doing it, he's running around telling his mom this and that about fucking spirituality. It seems really hypocritical to me. But that's the point of it. We're supposed to have this complex thought about it, and neither one of us is wrong because it's not true. So it's just an interpretation, and that's that. And I kind of feel like we're both pretty much on the same page about this, is that really what it really is about is how is Jesus trying to, what is his intention in this? And his intention is for all people, is to give them love and to elevate them and to bring the God out of them. And Ben, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, do you remember so later in the film when he's on the cross, or when he's getting led up to it, remember when he sees his mother in the crowd, and you remember what he says to her? Or he says it out loud, but maybe not loud enough for her to hear it, but he says, "Please, mother, please forgive me for being a bad son." So he sees that, he sees the way he treated her, and he wants forgiveness.
stay with me. Don't leave me.
Is being closer to the life that Jesus was trying to live, the life of love, the life of compassion, the life of, about caring for one another. That's what Christianity is not about. So if you're not applying any of those things to your life, but you're still going under the guise of Christianity, you might be doing it wrong. I'm just saying.
I do want to go back to what I said earlier because yeah, actually, when put into practice, it's not really that hard to live up to what Jesus taught. I just like, it's just when people take it to like extremes of like celibacy for life or something like that. If they see that that's their calling, then that's good for them. But like
I think we can all agree that you should be caring and you should love each other.
Exactly.
And that the community is really important and stuff like that. That each member of the community brings something, an important component to the whole. Which, and you don't have to be a religious nut or a Catholic or a Christian even to believe in that. You can just be an atheist socialist like some people. So another major theme in this film is the questioning of faith. So Jesus, throughout the entire thing, is like this constant fear of like his aberrant thoughts. He's afraid the fact that he's a man and that he's struggling. That he's just struggling to put to bed all these feelings, and he does this all the way up until the end of his life, basically, where he's just constantly questioning himself. And I mean, if you were in that position, and this is why I think a human Jesus is important, is if you were in that position, you would also feel the same way, because that's a lot of pressure to have to be put on yourself, especially since in the Bible, and I'm not sure if it's very clear in this, it's kind of a little clear in one scene whether or not Jesus knew he was going to die. You know what I mean? Whether he was aware of that or not. But it doesn't really seem like he's all that aware of it until the end, when he's starting the riots. So did you guys want to talk a little bit about faith? Not the George Michael song, Kenneth. Kenneth's a huge George Michael fan.
Unnecessary information.
How is that? I feel like that is a good.
Well, if we go to the song. No, we don't need. So, what do you mean by faith? Well, I'm not certain.
Well,
you were just saying what you were saying, and then you say, then you bring up the faith thing, and then I actually got confused by the nebulousness of what. I don't know what. I'm not sure what you mean by faith.
Maybe you weren't paying attention. What I was saying was that there's a questioning of faith in this film, and that throughout the entire film, Jesus is questioning himself and he's questioning his faith. Is there anything that you wanted to add or talk about faith?
Well, in his case, you said something about him not knowing that his destiny was to be on the cross. Mm-hmm. Yet the movie opens with him making crosses as a way to piss God off, so he would be clear. He was. That's what I got from that very first.
Well, he does say that, and basically what he says is that he's trying to shut God out by pissing him off. He wants God to ignore him because every time that God interacts with him causes him pain. Like the voices in Jesus' head are painful for him.
What if your father was telling you you're gonna have to die on the cross? Like what if? Actually, I'm thinking now you're right, because there's a scene later on where he says, "Well, God only reveals to me things incrementally."
Right.
Remember that?
Right.
Scene?
And so
that would make it not. He did not necessarily know that he was going to die on the cross. But if I thought that that's what this voice
he
in my
knew
head.
he was like, he was destined for something horrible. I feel like he already knew
And
that
he
something
knew
was
that,
going to happen.
and that's
Totally.
why he was trying to piss God off. So that
Well, he just wanted to
so
be
that
left
God-
alone and live his life like any one of us. You know, I wouldn't want to have this voice in my head that causes me pain, to have these incredible dreams where I wake up bloodied, like, you know, I mean, and then to be told that you're the Messiah and you have all these responsibilities towards humanity, like, that's a really big pill to swallow. And so that's a lot for any one person to handle. It's not.
That's the faith part,
right? And that, and right, and so I kind of there's a quote I found from Alan Watts. Kenneth and I were talking about Alan Watts earlier. We're both big fans, and
I also am a big fan.
And Ben's a huge big fan too. So the quote is, "To have faith is to trust yourself to the water. When you swim, you don't grab hold of the water, because if you do, you'll sink and drown. Instead, you relax and float." And that's my personal belief on faith, which is that, like, I always find that when I'm in a situation where my own faith, not my religious faith, but rather just my spiritual and life faith, is in question, where it's better to just kind of be like water, like Bruce Lee said, you know what I mean? Like, you just have to flow with it. And when it comes to all of your trials and tribulations, that faith is going to get you through it. Faith has always got people through it. Faith has always got people through a lot of stuff, or it doesn't. People had faith during the Holocaust, you know. But at the same time, you know, and that's a reality. That's a truth. And that's the practicality of religion. But I'm sure that their faith and their beliefs actually made the whole process a lot more easier. And it also gave them something not so horrible to look forward to, as opposed to, you know, bleak darkness. They had a heaven to go to, you know, and they had something to rely upon and to hold on to.
Yeah. And that's the part that I have challenges with, this whole religion thing, telling people that there's this afterlife thing that don't worry about now because you're going to get a crown.
Right,
this is actually what I question in this whole film, is they still do the crown part, and I'm still actually wondering, why are they tying the king of the Jews and this king thing where there's a man on top telling everybody else what to do? That's what I think of when I think of.
Well, because that's what, at the time, Jesus was called the King of the Jews, not only by the Romans, but by the Jews themselves. And so that was the title that was given to him. And so as a mockery of that, that's when the Romans decided
Have
to
the
put
Jews ever given anybody else who's a Jew the title King of the Jews?
Apparently not. but there were a lot of zealots that were killed, including John the Baptist. John the Baptist was killed by King Herod, but had nothing to do with that was King Herod.
Who was the last king of the Jews before Christ?
David.
Because I was thinking that too.
So
they've had a history of being kings.
Yeah, totally. They had a history, but this is tied to him specifically, because he is not necessarily they weren't calling him the king as if he should be put on the throne. They were calling him above everybody. They were saying that he was divine, because at that time the king was divine.
The King of Kings.
Yeah, the King of Kings. And so he
directly to God.
Exactly.
Which
so
is blasphemous,
was
unless you are the king.
Exactly.
Then
Or somebody who is tied to the priests at the time in Roman society or in Greek society, who was tied to the oracles and all of that. Those people were in control of the religion, and thus they were in control of society. What Jesus was talking about was being in control of your own religion and your own spirituality, so that you didn't need to go through a proxy or a middleman. And that really threw a stick into the cogs of the Roman Empire, and that's why David Bowie, I'm just going to call him David Bowie. That's when David Bowie told Jesus that he's a threat to Roman society, because he really screws things up, and that's why Bowie plays it in that, like, business is business kind of thing, you know what I mean? Where he's like, sorry, chap, like, you know, we gotta kill you. He's acting like that because Pontius Pilate knows that this is all politics. It has nothing to do with religion. For him, it has nothing to do with spirituality, because he doesn't think he's the son of God. He just thinks he's another zealot here to cause rebellion and insurrection in his empire. So he wants to get rid of this guy, but he just sees him as, like, another consequence. He's saying, sorry, dude, like, I'm sorry that you have to die, but that's just the way things are, you know.
Do you want to know something?
And you can either renounce your faith, or you can go through this. I mean, either way, you're going to die, kind of thing. And I think Jesus, the reason why it's so important for him to have questions his faith all the way up until this point is that at that point he was a little more attuned into his faith, where he didn't rebuke his faith. He lived up to it until he was crucified. And back to the integrity Kenneth and I were talking about earlier about, you know, integrity being one of the most important things that matters to people. Going back to like Scorsese's Goodfellas and stand-up guys and all that stuff, you know what I mean? Like having integrity.
The prophet Daniel had a vision. A tall statue had a gold head, silver shoulders. The stomach was bronze, the legs were iron, the feet were clay. A stone was thrown. The clay feet broke, and the statue collapsed.
Well, over the years, I was always interested in making a film on Jesus. Either film on the character of Jesus, either seen through the Gospels or through other eyes, in a sense. I remember being very, very moved by Pasolini's film Gospel According to St. Matthew, which was really a wonderful script. It was the Gospel, sorry. And but what was really interesting about the film was its offhanded manner, production manner, in which you have almost a cinema verite, a direct cinema, almost like a newsreel of the period in black and white. And I found that to be fascinating. But as the years went on, I was inspired to make this film about Jesus. The material I found to be the same direct line, where you have one scene that shows 4 different versions in the 4 different Gospels. Until I came upon the Kazantzakis book around 1972. Kazantzakis was interesting because of course, it's a work of fiction. And what was fascinating about the Kazantzakis idea was that he approached the substance of Jesus, the substance of Christ, from the 2 vantage points, the point of Jesus as human and Jesus as divine. And in a sense, it's according to certain councils in the beginning of the first 1,000 years of Christianity. In one of the councils, I think it's Chalcedon, it's determined that Christianity, Jesus was fully human and fully divine, one at the same time. And I think over the years we've been mainly seeing images of representations of Jesus as mainly divine, the divine side, the divine aspect of him. And what fascinated me about the Kazantzakis idea was he went through the other way, the human nature. And again, I have to state, it's fully divine and fully human, one and the same being, one entity, right? Both natures. And in Kazantzakis' idea, the human nature can't accept that fact until the very last moment, until he gives in and does God's will, does his Father's will, and dies on the cross as the sacrifice.
I did want to talk a little bit about Scorsese, a little bit. Ben, I'm sure you probably want to talk a little bit about this, but I feel like Scorsese's thing is that he's really good at having regular guys in irregular situations. And so like Scorsese writes what he knows, and what he knows is like from his New York upbringing. And so if you watch this film, it was really kind of off-putting for like the first half of the film, but Jesus and all his followers all have like New York accents, and like they're all pretty much like, I mean, Henry Dean Stanton, fucking Harvey Keitel, like, you know, Willem Dafoe, they're all these like Brooklyn guys, you know what I mean? And like, and then all the Romans are British and stuff like that, but
well, speaking of that, that's what I remember distinctly was when the very first time I see the film, I'm looking at Willem Dafoe and I'm thinking, oh my God. And I start listening to him and I'm still like, oh, this blue-eyed blonde, what the fuck? It doesn't feel like the Jesus that I'm used to, because I'm a Jesus freak and I've seen all the other movies, and it's always, I could believe them sooner, but in 20 minutes I was like, he had me. I no longer cared about his face and what it looked like. Because he's funny looking. Excuse me.
it's true. No, I'm sorry. I don't mean.
Everybody knows True Dad on Defoe.
Yeah,
but he's good because of that. In spite of that, especially because of that.
Totally.
So anyway, but
no, I think that's really cool for you to bring that up, and totally, I think that Willem Dafoe is such good acting. That's what saves it. And
how
honestly,
many people of you out there who have never seen Willem Dafoe's best part? This is it.
It's not the Green Goblin from Spider-Man, I'll tell you that for sure. But yeah, Platoon is also a really good film. He's been in so many good films. He's such a great actor. But this was his breakout role, and this is what really kind of made him. as being that crazy actor, and also he doesn't like you said, the common perception of Jesus is this like beautiful man with a six-pack on the cross
without a lot of pain.
Divine, the look of divinity on his face during the crucifixion and all that stuff. I forget what it's called, but there's a name actually for the look of divinity on people's faces when they're, I can't remember what it's called, but basically it's
intoxication.
Yeah, it's like the intoxication of the ecstasy of God, basically. And so every statue has that look on their face because they're so full of the ecstasy of God that, you know, they don't care about the fact that, you know, Saint Teresa's about to have an arrow pierced through her, or, you know, Jesus is about to be, you know,
because they're in the
strung
now,
up on a tree.
And so they're in the orgasmic moment of their own spirituality.
Totally. So I think Scorsese, he's really good at having these like regular characters put in these really irregular situations, be it mafia situations, you know, or police.
He's trying to bring it down to the regular person so that we can get these stories are for us. That's what Scorsese gets.
Yeah, exactly.
His main audience is New York. That's just where he comes from. That's why I asked you, Ben, earlier, where are you from? Because I'm like, well, where'd you come out of? Because every place puts different sort of folk out onto the planet.
Yeah, you know.
I am. Was it Idaho?
Idaho, yeah.
Haley, Idaho.
Haley, Idaho.
How big a town is that?
When I lived there, was like 3,500 people.
So a lot like Nazareth.
Yeah, Ben could be the next Jesus.
Where are you from, Kenneth?
Air Force Fathers, how I like to say it. Meaning we moved a hell of a lot. Sacramento, but we were only there a short time. We moved my whole life until 18.
Okay.
I was under the impression, Kenneth, that you were birthed in a pearl at the bottom of the ocean that just like floated to the top, and the angels came down and they.
Clam that
some clam
that wasn't supposed to tell you. Shared that with you, I'm sure. I
there was
told
a clam
them all
involved.
to stop talking, but you know how they are. They're just happy.
So yeah, I know that's a really good point to bring up about Scorsese, is that he writes films that people know, and that's why it's important in this film that Jesus is a regular dude. He's just this guy from Brooklyn, you know what I mean? And like I said earlier, Scorsese was raised Catholic, and so a lot of that stuff comes into his films. You know, the internal conflict that comes up with faith is like, you know, do I get the life that I want from ungodly acts, or do I stay in line with the faith that has strict rules of conduct?
Which is the either-or capacity that the Bible continues to spew itself.
Well, the interpretations, right?
The interpretations or whatever. And so leaving out something like the Gospel of Thomas, where they actually have humanified Jesus, and he's continually questioning things, and he's questioning the disciples to look deeper beyond faith.
Right.
And that's what the Bible doesn't allow us to have the opportunity to explore that I've heard of so far.
Well, it's not the Bible, it's just people.
No.
because
right. If they're taking the Bible as the complete word of the Lord, right. Jesus Christ is who they're talking about, but they leave out a couple of the disciples' points of view, then we're not getting a
and I think that, like, you know, a lot of that deals with, like, dogma. And the dogma in faith is one of the biggest problems that we have as far as religion is concerned. And that goes back to the proxies and the oracles. And that all has to deal with how people feel like they have access to their faith and their religion and their power. And some people feel like they need to go through this conduit of church, or go into these types of situations, or have people interpret things like the Bible for them, or things like faith for them. People need that. People need teachers and stuff like that. Unfortunately, sometimes social norms, all the time social norms, and not a lot of them are you know, we have to progress past a lot of them. And so I think the common interpretation of religion and Jesus right now is different probably than the one that was presented at the time when this film was created. And I think that might actually have something to do with this film also, because this was one of the first major interpretations of Jesus where he was a man. He was a guy. There was no other, before this there was like, what, you know, Jesus Christ Superstar, and, you know, what other films, and then there was, you know, the biblical stuff with like Charlton Heston, and, you know.
Everything else, he was the perfect man who made no
exactly,
mistakes.
He made no mistakes. Exactly.
That's not a human.
It's not practical. You can't apply yourself to that.
You can't grow without making
mistakes.
We need mistakes. Mistakes are to be, well, that's all.
Right, and they put us towards godliness. But Ben, did you want to talk a little bit about Scorsese?
Yeah, before that, I haven't seen it yet, but I really, really, really want to see The Gospel According to St. Matthew by Pier Paolo Pasolini.
Yeah.
Speaking of controversial filmmakers, this man made the most controversial film of all time, Salo, 120 Days of Sodom.
Yeah.
And
don't watch that.
Unless you need a real cleansing of the soul.
Or just a good old colonic. If you like poop.
But what I've heard about that movie is that it's the most honest, straight from the Bible onto celluloid thing that's ever happened.
Which is kind of crazy if you throw in a historical context and if you actually do it according to the Bible. The Bible is nuts.
Yeah.
If you want a good yarn, if you want a good story, read the Bible. It is the greatest story ever told. There's a lot of shit that happens in there.
But yeah, Scorsese, man. So my understanding is that before he became a filmmaker, he was studying to become a priest.
Yeah, he was very much. Yeah. That's his Catholic upbringing,
only because his mother wanted him.
Yeah, and that plays. You see that in all his movies. Actually, there's a mother figure, overbearing mother figure, and Kenneth really ties.
Well, no, one of the kids has to be spirit. Why? It looks good on her. She can tell her friends. Mothers are superficial people oftentimes, in some ways, because they're looking for to be the cool person in the neighborhood. So what's your kid do? Oh, well, I got one who's a doctor, one's a veterinarian, and one's a priest. Oh, they're successful. Take away the priest. Oh, okay. But the priest balances out. Oh, you give back to the culture. You give back to community. I think priests are, well, I definitely have, had they had a better payment system, I think I'd be there.
Well, your payment is, your faith and your religion.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Exactly. Not enough bread on the table. Not enough bread.
Kenneth's a little more flesh than soul.
At this point in time?
At this point in time.
So
it's true, yeah.
I love that Scorsese, like you talked about, he makes these movies about basically like the common man or what have you. My mom, if I bring up like a Scorsese movie, she doesn't want to watch it because she doesn't want to see a bunch of guys get shot and blood flying all over the place.
Which is the common perception of Scorsese. He is known for making a lot of gangster films.
Which is interesting. His other movies like Alice Doesn't Live Here
Great
Anymore.
Film. Yeah.
It's one of my favorite ones by him. That movie is nowhere near as famous as Taxi Driver and Goodfellas, even though Ellen Burstyn won Best Actress for it. So that's an example of like him not having crazy amount of violence in the movie, even though it does have.
I mean, he's done so much stuff. You know what I mean? Like he's done TV commercials. I mean, he did Bad, the music video for Michael Jackson. Like he's done so many things, and like people, and I get it. People zero in on the gangster stuff. They zero in on that stuff, and that's pretty prevalent because that's what he knows. But yeah, his range is so much greater than that. Like Kundun, which we'll talk about a little later. Is a great film, and that there's not a single gangster in that movie, unless you count the Dalai Lama. Pretty gangster in my opinion. But,
But he has that, like he could be like a Spielberg type of guy, like if he wanted to. Make these movies that like everybody wants to watch. But he just does his thing and makes these like super personal films.
What about Minority Report though? Nobody wanted to watch it. I'm just kidding, sorry.
Was that Scorsese?
That was Spielberg.
But anyway, so one of my favorite Scorsese movies is Mean Streets.
Yeah,
and I love that Harvey Keitel plays Judas in The Last Temptation of Christ. In Mean Streets, Harvey Keitel plays a young like friend of hoodlums. He himself isn't like necessarily a hoodlum, but he hangs out with these like up and coming gangsters.
Right. And
one of his good friends is like a small time hood played by Robert De Niro, Johnny Boy, and the whole the movie is Harvey Keitel plays a Catholic in the movie who's like goes to church and like. So he's hanging out with these like criminals, but he's trying to live this like spiritual life, and he's constantly trying to help Johnny Boy. Like, why are you always getting in debt with these bookies? What are you doing? Right. Why do you keep doing this? And he's always like bailing him out and stuff. And so it was cool seeing Harvey Keitel on like not like the opposite end of that, but Judas is kind of.
You want freedom for Israel?
No. I want freedom for the soul.
No, that's what I can't accept. That's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. First you free the body, then you free the spirit. The Romans come first. You don't build a house from the roof down. You build it from the foundation up.
The foundation is the soul.
The foundation is the body. That's where you must begin.
No, if you don't change the spirit first, change what's inside, then you're only going to replace the Romans with somebody else, and nothing ever changes. Even if you're victorious, you'll still be filled with the poison. You've got to break the chain of evil.
How do you change then?
With love.
A little quick, because I think Harvey Keitel is a great actor. As long as he keeps his clothes on, some people might know what that's reference to.
That's my favorite performance.
Bad
Lieutenant.
Yeah.
Which one are we talking about?
Oh, yeah, he's been naked in a few films. Please stop, Harvey Keitel, if you're listening. One film I did want to talk about is Bringing Out the Dead. Have you seen that movie?
I love that.
It's such a good movie, and it's so weird. And it was weird for me because I was a kid when that movie came out, and like I was used to Scorsese being the gangster guy, right? And I saw that film and I was like, what is this movie? You know what I mean? Like, such a weird movie, and it's really cool.
I still haven't seen it since I was a kid. I want to see it again so bad.
It's so much more.
So crazy.
There's so much more there. Yeah. How do you feel about Scorsese's newer stuff?
I like it a lot.
Like from The Aviator on.
So The Departed is one of my favorite Scorsese movies, and Shutter Island. I love both.
What about
of those.
Hugo? Did you like Hugo?
Yeah,
I liked Hugo.
I like all of his movies. Silence was the last one I saw. I just saw it.
Our Lord said to them, "Go ye into the whole world and preach the gospel to every living creature."
Ferreira is lost to us. He renounced God in public and surrendered the faith.
That's not possible. Father Ferreira risked his life to spread our faith all over Japan.
It seems to me that our mission here is more urgent than ever. We must go find Father Ferreira.
This is in your hearts, then, both of you?
Yes.
Then I must trust God has put it down. The moment you set foot in that country, you step into high danger.
The price for your glory is their suffering.
It's too dangerous.
We asked for this mission. Praying to silence.
But I did want to talk a little bit about Scorsese's religious trilogy. So he did in 1988 The Last Temptation, of course. He did Kundun in 1997, and then he did Silence in 2017. And these three movies, I feel like, kind of deal with the same stuff. I don't know, Kenneth, have you seen Kundun or Silence?
Not Silence.
Okay, so Silence came out pretty recently, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But Kundun is about the Dalai Lama.
I got that one down.
And so Silence is a little more about like the Portuguese priests going to Japan to try to convert them, and it's about the rejection of faith, and also or even the defense of faith. So in all his films, in these three films, I feel like the major themes of them, and this is just me, is how do we view God and how does God view us? And so with The Last Temptation, it's basically, Jesus, it's his son. And then in the second one, we have the Dalai Lama, and then we have all the politics and the religion that are tied into his expulsion from China, or from Tibet, from the Chinese, and all of that, and how religion can become politicized.
This is Mongolia, north side of China. They're all Tibetan Buddhists. So the Dalai Lama has the spiritual. He has them by the spiritual short hairs, and the Chinese are like
the spiritual balls.
So that's why that's my understanding of what they had to get, because there didn't seem like there's it's a big deal to go over the mountains and then launch an attack or something. Maybe you could have bases in Tibet to then launch down into if India really wanted to go to China.
Right, and then India and China have always had, and Pakistan have all had border disputes, and another part of but especially between those guys though. But with Tibet also, there's a lot that has to do with water as well. But the major reason is because that region was militaristically important to China to prevent anything with India at the time, because at that time tensions were really starting to rise, because at that time India was also gaining its independence from Britain. It was starting to liberate itself from British rule. So they were starting to, express themselves as a nation. When it comes to silence, in the movie In Silence, this movie, basically these two Portuguese priests, they're Jesuit, right? Yeah, so two Jesuit priests go, and they are sent on this mission to go rescue this other priest, because what's going on in Japan is basically they're gathering up all of the Christians, and they're either forcing them to renounce their faith, or they're killing them, or both, or they're torturing them. And so there's a rumor going around that this famous priest who went there several years prior had renounced his faith, and so they have a
turned
mission.
Japanese, so to speak.
he was turning
like
Japanese.
With wolves, similar thing.
Yeah, or the popular '80s song, and
it's a great song.
It's a very good song.
David Bowie.
I'm gonna hit you. No. That's Modern English? No, that's not modern. Is it Modern English?
I don't know who it is.
I think it's modern. It's like their only hit.
You'll find out.
Yeah, look it up. Google it. So anyways, so they go and they have to find out whether this priest had renounced his faith. And during the process, one of them dies, and the other one goes through these trials, and basically, I don't really want to spoil the movie too much. I don't want to give away the ending or anything like that. But basically, the themes of it are questioning one's faith, and it's also about the practicality of faith. Is it practical to be a faithful person in a situation where you're going to be put to death? Is it a practical situation to expect that from anybody? And so that's the questions that are presented in this film, where these people are put through these situations where they have to question their faith. And some of them do renounce their faith. And so that's a practical reaction to...
But that might have been appropriate in the moment.
That's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
Is your faith practical? Maybe not. And so that's what that film really is about. And Ben, you just saw it. I saw it a long time ago, but Ben, you just saw it recently. Yeah. So, is that pretty much what you got out of it?
Yeah, and I think that's age-old concept of do you want to I don't want to be put in that position, but are you willing to die for your faith, or
totally,
like in a public setting, and where is it worth it? Does God care if you renounce it?
Totally.
Is it going to be a big deal to God if you say to some guy that's with an axe, no, I was just kidding. I don't actually believe in God.
It's as simple in the movie as putting your foot on a representation of Jesus. It's not even like a full thing or anything. You don't have to go into the public and tell everybody or whatever. You literally just have to step on an image of Christ and tell your executor that you renounce him. That's pretty much all they're asking you to do. So that in itself is easy, right? So that you can just say, I renounce my faith, but then you're put in that position, like you're saying, where you're supposed to be like, well, what do I do? Do I sacrifice myself for my faith? Is my faith really worth it? And then you start thinking, is my faith real? Because I'm about to be tested right now. I'm about to be tested to the final level. Is this real? Is what I believe in the truth?
It only is if you choose it to be.
Well,
but
also
it's also does it matter?
Exactly.
Or can I just lie to this guy real quick and have my faith be totally unaffected?
Exactly.
Right. And but apparently isn't the story about the Bible that the disciples, after Jesus died, like the disciples all got murdered too for not renouncing Jesus.
Yeah, most of them did, and I think Paul and a few of them. I don't remember exactly, but yeah, most of them were killed.
Well, the favorite one though, and I don't remember. I forget who the favorite was, but John. Was he known as the favorite?
Yeah.
And then Jesus says to him, "And you will deny me 3 times before this night is over."
Right.
So he does that essentially, because that to me is the stepping on the face.
So,
of Christ.
so he's telling John that it's okay to deny me.
No, he's not telling him that. He says you're going to. You think you have faith? You're gonna deny me. You're gonna kiss me, and you're gonna. He said what was gonna happen.
Calls it all out. Yeah.
And then when they even when we know how it is, what choice do we make?
Right.
And the choice John made was exactly what Jesus knew, because Jesus looked within himself. I'm going to say that's how he knew he would do that.
Right.
Because Jesus was a human.
Mm-hmm.
And humans, if we get in touch with our humanity, we know what the other one is going to most likely do in any situation, because put yourself in that.
Right.
What would you really do? If it's really your mother, you're going to be as harsh with her? Well, you might not, but I was, because I was pissed. My mother never hugged me. That's a whole other story, Mom. I know you're not listening.
I think circumstantially it's a little difficult to answer, but I think in that situation I probably wouldn't react that way. I did want to talk about the controversy of this film. I was surprised to hear that, Kenneth, you didn't know that this movie was controversial.
No, that's my understanding that the biggest controversy about the movie was the scene with Mary Magdalene.
Yes, that is the biggest scene, yeah.
The biggest controversy in this country always has to do with sex.
Totally.
Elvis Presley, they're burning his records. Why? His hips? Are we kidding? They're moving hips? That's why we're burning his albums, or the Beatles, or whatever? No, that was a different.
They were some hips.
Were there hips in the Beatles?
I doubt there was hips in the Beatles.
All right. Where was it?
There's a lot of screaming girls.
Yes.
The Beatles.
Oh, we're talking about controversy.
Controversy. Oh, so the controversy of the movie was that they showed Jesus standing in a line. He chooses to not have sex. He chooses to ask for forgiveness. But they didn't watch the movie. I'm believing they didn't actually see this movie and give it any sort of chance, because Jesus wasn't tempted by Mary Magdalene in the least. If one saw that whole scene, he was pulled to go talk to her. I forget why.
He was just pulled there. God pulled him there.
Oh, right.
He followed an angel.
Yeah. He follows this
the
angel.
little boy. Yeah, the little boy comes. Yeah.
Not
with the voice of the little girl.
I thought it was the man.
It was
like
a man
one of the
in a gold.
customers.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
He was
okay,
a man in a
right.
beautiful golden outfit. And what I noticed about him,
was he an angel?
No, he wasn't an angel.
He wasn't a real angel, but he was dressed like a real angel could be dressed.
They were all very nicely dressed, yes. And that's explicit in the script.
It was gorgeous. It was a very beautiful. But I noticed about the guy, what he did was, before he walked into the room, Mary Magdalene was in. There was a white and a black snake intertwined.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what the significance of it was, except my belief it has something to do with her being a priestess. And that's where they really have a controversy, because with prostitutes and priestesses, when they intertwine the light and the dark practices, healing happens. That to me was the real biggest controversy about this whole. That's what they don't want.
Dark within the context of a duality, not
or
necessarily
because
dark.
women should never be ever seen to see that it's okay to use their sexual capacities in anything except procreation.
Right, and that's basically, in my opinion, the dark aspect of that. Because I think that you're right, and the oracles that I was talking about before, that they also had an aspect to them. Some of them were chaste. So the idea that women are supposed to be one thing or another, and in this time, property, basically, children were property, women were property, slaves obviously were property. The only person that wasn't property was the man of the household. And so Mary Magdalene being empowered by her abilities and her skills, and by what she does is threatening to certain people. But you know, Mary is a very complicated character in all aspects, in every interpretation. Mary Magdalene, I should say, is a very complex character in every iteration of the Bible, because everybody has their interpretation of why she's important. But the common theme in the Bible is that she's important because Jesus hung out with all kinds of people, you know what I mean? And he forgave whoever. That's really what it was about. But in this iteration, they're implying that Jesus and Mary were friends and that there might have been some kind of relationship between the two of them. It's not super explicit, but she talks about when they were children, about when they got older, and things started to change between the two of them. So there's like a real interaction, and so that's part of the temptation of Christ, basically. And so
I actually think that's the intellectual point of view. I think that but just from the controversial aspect of it, they were saying that her showing this scene at the beginning of you can't do that. You can't show a woman fucking a variety of men.
Well, that was the controversy at the time. But what the film is trying to say is that
what you said.
That Jesus is he basically is testing himself. He absolves himself. But he says later on, and then we see in a scene too where he like checks out a woman at the water or whatever. But basically he talks later to his mom, and he tells her that he does lust after women. He talks about how he pretends that he blushes and he looks away, but he actually does look at women. And so like that's part of the humanity of Jesus, but it's also part about he was in a way kind of, in my opinion, and I think this is kind of true in the film, is that he was testing himself, but he was also looking to be absolved by Mary, and ultimately he just needed to be forgiven by somebody, because he carried this guilt around for him with so much, being the Son of God, that he sought it out from whoever. But Mary was really important to Jesus, and but anyway.
Well, was it also controversial to depict Jesus in such a human?
Yeah,
just
really,
the whole way that this film and book depicts Jesus in
well,
itself is like a controversial.
And a lot of that too was born out of the hippie movement, like this reevaluation of Christianity and spiritual beliefs that were held before it. The reason why, Scorsese wanted to make this movie back in '72.
Wow.
Yeah, and he wanted to make this with, I'm gonna have to look it up.
The book was
he worked with Barbara Hershey before in another film that I forgot the name of.
When did
Boxcar Bertha?
Yeah, Boxcar Bertha. And so they worked together, and then she gave him the book, and he was like, "Oh, this is really awesome. I want to make this into a film." So we started optioning it, and it wasn't until '88 when it actually started getting greenlit.
Wow.
But the conditionals for him making the film was that he had to make a very commercial film afterwards, and I think after that was
after Last Temptation.
Yeah, The Last Temptation was. It was Cape Fear.
Oh,
the
wow.
remake. Yeah, and so Cape Fear was basically, he made Cape Fear so that he could make The Last Temptation.
I heard that Cape Fear was
That's De Niro, right?
Mostly De Niro's idea to make that movie.
Yeah,
like De Niro would
It wasn't a bad De Niro movie, actually.
I love that.
It worked out. If you had a commitment, like if most people have these shitty commitments that they have to do, and they end up making stuff like Edward Norton ended up having to do all this I believe it was the one with the cars. There was a remake with Charlize Theron, Mark Wahlberg.
God, yeah.
Not Gone in 66. The Italian Job.
Italian Job.
He was an Italian Job because he was committed to that film because of Primal Fear that he had made. So actors make these deals. I don't know if people know, but in the
Mini Coupes.
I'm
a little slow, everybody.
But yeah, so but in Hollywood, you have to play the game, and part of the playing the game sometimes is you agree to certain requirements. If you say like, oh, I'm going to be in this big, huge film and I'm going to be the star, they're going to say, well, wait.
Are you sure Primal Fear was the one? Those are like years apart, weren't they?
Yeah, but he skirted that for very long. And the Italian Job was literally forced upon him. They were like, if you don't do this, we're going to sue the shit out of you.
Well, that's got to be one of the most superficial movies of all.
And you can see it in Edward Norton's performance that he does not want to be in that film. He didn't promote it. He didn't do anything with it. He hated it. But we come to find out that he's kind of
Well, I just want to say, in defense of him.
Oh, I don't have anything with
Dude, one of the coolest interviews I've ever seen was him on the show, Elvis Mitchell's show, Under the Influence.
Yeah.
Dude, it's like 30 minutes, and just what Edward Norton talks about with like the art of acting is like one of the cool. It's like film school. I watched it like a few times. It's amazing.
Repeat that. What interview?
There's a TV show that Turner Classic Movies produced called Under the Influence, where this film critic named Elvis Mitchell interviews filmmakers, and Edward Norton was on there, and that episode is
it's worth seeing.
It's amazing.
Yeah, Edward Norton knows film. He knows like the industry. He's a writer. He's written stuff. He actually did a lot of ghostwriting on that Hulk movie he was in. That was another contractual obligation.
His like stuff on that episode, like you can apply it to whatever you do in life too. The way that he explains film is very applicable to anything.
Right.
It's cool.
And I want to go back to Scorsese, because Scorsese is the complete opposite in that Scorsese's not he's not a Kubrick type director. He's not the guy that runs around with a bullhorn, telling everybody what to do and acting like a megalomaniac. I shouldn't say megalomaniac, because I love what Kubrick does and I love what it takes for him to get to where he needs to be, but I know that there's a consequence for that, and every creative person is different. And so Scorsese's style is that he tends not to be so disruptive. He tends to just kind of like let things happen organically, and I really appreciate that kind of stuff, and you can see it in his films. I feel like if there's any drawbacks to this film in particular, I feel like maybe it has a lot to do with the budget. Like for me, the first chunk of the movie of The Last Temptation is very clunky. And this is a problem I found with Kundun, which is that Kundun just kind of feels like a series of scenes as opposed to like a real movie. And the beginning of The Last Temptation kind of feels like that too. And that's kind of what I like about Scorsese too, from what I've read about him and his shooting style, is that he's kind of one of those guys that's just like, let's just shoot it and then we'll edit it. You know what I mean? Like, let's just get whatever, let's shoot stuff and let's get it and then we'll figure it out afterwards. You know what I mean? And he's not like Kubrick, where Kubrick has like a huge list. He has scenes written out. It's very specific. It's a map to him. Everything's exactly the way. And so it's a little more organic with Scorsese. So for me, I think if I had to bring any criticism to The Last Temptation on a filmmaker standpoint, I would definitely have to say that there's some story issues at the very beginning. It does feel a little clunky. We're not introduced to some of the characters, I felt like, organically. Like Judas just kind of shows up. We're already supposed to assume that Jesus is, there's a lot to assume here from the Bible, even though that a lot of the stuff that happens in this isn't from the Bible, you know what I mean? So it's kind of weird. I felt like it could have been done better, but it's a rush job. Scorsese himself said that filming this was like shooting in a state of emergency. I think they only had like 40-something days, $7 million to shoot it in another country, you know what I mean? Like it's daunting to do that with a full $14 million budget as opposed to $7 million. So, but generally I feel like the story itself is really good. There's a beginning, middle, and end. There's a catharsis to it, obviously. And for me, the greatest thing that we can take away from this basically is to think a little bit more about your beliefs. I feel like that's really, if there's one universal takeaway from this outside of religion, is just to think a little bit more about your beliefs and take a moment to refrain on those things, because there is a practicality that should be interjected into that. It's not just the pretty words, there's also a real life that you have to live. And if you're only focused on the words, it's hard for you to get down to the nitty-gritty and actually do those things. And that's the problem I feel like modern Christians have, is that a lot of them are all talk and they're not doing a whole lot. Because, and that's my personal opinion from what I've witnessed while in my time in the church and also outside of the church, is that the general perception is that it's not about loving everybody unconditionally, like they say in the Bible. Unconditional love, that's another thing that I don't think is something people think about. There's no conditionary aspect to it. There's no rules for that love. It's unconditional. It doesn't matter if you're gay, black, trans, whatever. You're supposed to love everybody and have compassion for everybody. And you don't see that anymore with, Christians and
people
all
that make you mad.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always people, I feel like now that people who are of some kind of faith generally use their faith as, it's always been that way, as a justification for hurting other people or for dominating or for exploiting. And even, which is ironic to me, because Christianity for the longest time was a very persecuted, it's lucky to still exist after all of it went through. And so it's just ironic now that the tables have turned and that Christianity seems to be the thing that's persecuting a lot of things that I feel like are intrinsic to the human experience.
It's so crazy when people kill people in the name of God, especially in this day and age. It's like, pretty sure it says to love. I'm pretty sure religion is about loving, not killing. And all religions do it, man. I guess there's like Buddhist monks killing people like right now. And it's interesting. I through studying some Buddhism stuff, I ran across this thing that was like really appealed to me, talking about how like there's many ways to God, and they're basically all the same thing, and it's been called the Nirvana of Buddha, the Father of Jesus, the Allah of Muhammad, the Tao of Lao Tzu, and like these are all different spiritual leaders or like books about somebody that may or may not have existed, that all teach the same thing, and to love each other.
So the essence I got from this film was the intending to place responsibility on the individual, and that you get to choose, and that Jesus is not only, so his humanness is us. So we can fail, and we can ask for forgiveness all over the place, and then they will forgive us or they won't. But the idea, this film to me, what it gave me most was the compassion for myself, my own humanity, and it helps me aspire to be as Christ-like as possible, because I think of the love you, when he's saying love your enemy, that's one of the Christian things. The reason for the Christian revitalization, I think the reason it hasn't died off, is because the amount of truth that is mixed in with all the all the patriarchal stuff
and that's there. The reason why it was initially feared, is because that there was a lot of truth there that aligned more so with reality than, say, getting your news from the oracles or whatever was be done before, or sacrificing bulls, on the beach.
Because that was Gandhi's understanding, was that truth was what he was really looking to be he thought that was going to be the more powerful than anything else, and that's what he was looking to find in his own way.
I did want to finish up with an Alan Watts quote real quick. I like this one a lot too. I told this one to Kenneth earlier. Basically, it says, man suffers only because he takes seriously what God's made for fun. And at the end of the day, this is all for fun, and all the stuff that we talked about, we did take it a little too seriously, and that the film should be, entertained, So it's like, to bring it back into the reality of stuff, is that we did talk about some really big things here that impact the world on a bigger level. But I honestly do believe in these words that Alan Watts said, which is like, the other quote that I told Kenneth was, life is not a journey, it's a song, and you're meant to sing and dance. And so I believe that 100%, that life is not supposed to be this aspiration towards the pearly gates, or this thing that we're supposed to get to. The get to is here, and the get to is right now. And living in the moment and playing in the moment and all that stuff is really important. And I think people are now realizing that they can move away from the materialistic stuff. They can get off the Facebook, and they can start, I'm seeing these things, and I'm hoping that these things are starting to grow more and becoming more prolific around the world, or at least around the country, which is that people are starting to find in themselves the ability and the tools that they need to make a better world, that they don't need stuff on the outside, that God is on the inside, and that we all are God, and that through self-discovery and through our connection with our faith, we do become God, and we do become powerful. And that's in itself what I think the most important takeaway from this film, and from all the stuff that we're saying, is that you in yourself, the listener, have the ability to do incredible things in the world the same way Jesus did. And that Jesus was just a man, but he was imbued with these abilities, not because he was special, but because it was just showing that all of us have the potential for that. That's all that it was trying to do, was to show that we all could live that way. And if that you do want to be a Christian, that's what that means. You walk into the footsteps of Jesus. And I'm pretty sure Jesus never owned a gun. So on that note, thanks guys. I thoroughly enjoyed watching this film, and I thoroughly enjoyed recording this podcast with you guys. So thanks everybody. Thanks Ben, thanks Kenneth for joining me on this.
That's how he works. That's how the good Lord, he works.
guys. Hey, I just want to say one other thing.
Go on.
Yeah. No, I to quote Bill Hicks too. It's just a ride. I'm glad you brought that up. And on that note, my favorite Scorsese film is After Hours. It's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, that's
I highly recommend it because Last Temptation of Christ is kind of a bummer. Go watch After Hours afterwards. It's fun.
What do you want from me? What have I done? I'm just a word processor, damn it.
Is that all there is?
After Hours, when anything can happen, and usually does.
Is that unbelievable or what?
That's all there is, my friend.